One of the most important traits that you find in those who are winning the battle for mental wellness is the trait of resiliency, tenacity. Some of my generation would call it endurance. The ability to sustain in difficult circumstances. There is a direct correlation in success in life and your ability to build resiliency, the ability to develop tenacity. I had someone say to me the other day, well, you know what? I'm just not wired to be a resilient person. And I would say to you that you aren't born with resiliency. You develop resiliency over time in your life. And if you hear anything else I say, I want you to hear me say this. Hey, everyone, you can't build resilience without resistance. Resistance is a key aspect of building resiliency in your life. And the fact of the matter is, most of us do not like the pain of resistance. If I were sitting in a room with many of you right now and asked you how many of you would love to become an elite, either weightlifter or an elite ultra marathon runner, I would guess that a significant number of you would raise your hands. But then if I asked, would you be willing to do what it would take for you to become an elite weightlifter or endurance, even an ultra marathoner? I don't know how many of us would give ourselves to the task, because the resistance involved, the pain involved, the sacrifice involved in developing those disciplines are going to mean that you're going to have to say no to some things you've been saying yes to, so that you might be able to say yes to things that you've been saying no to. There are important elements of endurance, of tenacity, of building resilience in your life that are true in the world that we can see, and they're true in the world that we cannot see. From a scientific or a biological side, there are some things that doctors and medical professionals have told us that are incredibly important if we want to develop resiliency. One of them is we have to get enough rest. We have to get enough sleep, that our bodies cannot build the endurance that we need, the resiliency that we need, unless we're willing to rest and give our bodies time to recover. Physical rest is so important. And for those of us who battle mental wellness issues, we know that for lots of us, getting sleep at night is it's a challenge at best, isn't it? So we're going to have to find other times to get some kind of rest, even if it's just lying still, so that our bodies can recover. It's also about proper nutrition. You want to become an elite runner, then you're going to have to decide that what you put in your body is more for fuel than it is for enjoyment. And as one who decided many years ago that I wanted to try my hand at running marathons, I just wanted to put myself in a position where physically it had to be my mind over my body. I found out that what I was eating was incredibly important. And there were many times I had to say no to things that I enjoyed a lot so that I could say yes to getting my body ready to run. Now, once you develop that kind of endurance, the benefit was I could eat things that others couldn't eat because I was doing things that others were not doing. And so that's important as well. And then there is this aspect in your physical body of consistency, that you've heard it said before that, half of the battle for most of us is just showing up. And this is true in developing resiliency. When you meet your resistance, even when you're not at your best, even when everything within your body is screaming no, even when your mind is coming up with a million reasons to not do it, when you show up and you do the work consistently over time, you become able to do things that you couldn't do before because of the resiliency that you have developed. I'll never forget, over 20 years ago, when a friend of mine was running on a track in the mornings, and he said to me, would you come out? And I really had I said, I'm not a runner. He said, neither am I, come out. And I came out with him. And if you knew me well, you'd know that I kind of have this theory of life that if it's worth doing, it's worth overdoing. And that first morning, as we were out there and beginning to jog around the track very, very slowly, I said, we ought to find a race to run. He said, yeah, we ought to run a 5K. I said, no, we ought to become marathoners. And he said, that's 26.2 miles. I said, it doesn't have to happen today. It can happen over time. And so we chose a date in the next year. And we found a plan. And for me, I had to begin before the beginner's plan. I literally was running down my street in between mailboxes. But you see, I wasn't a marathoner yet. I had to do what I could do in that moment to the best of my ability, and then begin to push my body forward before 1 mile turned into 2 into 3, and finally into 26.2, because resiliency is built over time. Resiliency is built in consistently achieving small, measurable progress in your life. And the ability to sustain effort over a prolonged period of time is the essence of resiliency, and it doesn't happen without resiliency. It's not able to happen. Now, what's true in the physical world is doubly true in the spiritual world. James chapter 1 says, count it pure joy, my friends, when you face trials of many kinds, because you know that in the testing of your faith, you will develop endurance. I never understood that verse for so long. I thought what James was telling me is that I had to be happy about the pain of my trial, which is exactly opposite of what James is saying. James is not saying I need to be happy about my trial. James says I can find joy in the fact that God is developing endurance in me as I meet resistance in my life. That many times the very thing we run from, the very thing we try to avoid, is the very thing God uses to make incredible differences in our lives. I was talking to a young man who's a young father, 3 children, and he has been fighting some panic attacks in his life. Let me tell you about this young man. He is one of the most gifted young men I've ever been around. He is personable. He has a personality. He's one of these guys, everybody likes him. He's incredibly intelligent, and he's very intuitive. He had a dream of working in the professional sports world, and he's achieved that dream. And he's living the dream literally that almost, 10 years ago in high school, he said, in a perfect world, this is what I would do for a living. The problem is he's developed severe anxiety when he's asked to speak publicly. And his job requires him to speak publicly. And so we began to talk about his anxiety attacks, these panic attacks that would hit him when he began to stand up in front of people and present. And after listening to him for quite a while, I said, listen, my friend, your problem is not your anxiety. Your problem is the anxiety that you're having about your anxiety. I said, what is your greatest fear? He said that I would lose my job, that we would lose our home, and I would end up on the street. And I said, well, how long have you been battling this issue? He said, a couple of years. And I said, what percentage of the time do you find yourself fighting panic attacks? He said about 5 or 10% of the time. And I said, have you ever been fired? No. Has your wife ever caused you to believe that she's disappointing you because of this issue in life? And he said, no. And I said, well, then you need to see this weakness as a great gift and an ability to shape your character to depend on God more than you're depending on yourself. And I just said to him, Don't mistake what I'm saying, my friend. I'm not saying you don't work hard. I'm telling you, you haven't had a lot of resistance in your life. And most of the time, God is going to use your challenges to build resiliency in you and to help move you toward your destiny. It's why I say in this 30-year battle that I have had with panic and anxiety attacks, that as much as I would wish to never have this happen to me again, there's a part of me that fears who I would have become if I wouldn't have been humbled by these kind of challenges in my life. I am a high achiever. I am a hard driver. I am one that God has given certain gifts, not all the gifts, but some gifts. And I think the greatest fear for me is that I would become proud of myself and be completely reliant on myself and take the easy path most of the time. But what I've learned on this battle for my mental health is that resistance is an opportunity for me to build something in my life that I would never have had I not faced these kind of issues. I understand now at this point in my life what these unforced rhythms of grace that Jesus talked about in the Message version in Matthew. I understand what those are. I understand how I've got to quiet my spirit, how I've got to give myself regularly to rest and reflection, how I've got to be a part of activities that bring life to me. It's necessary for my soul. And I would have run past those things and wouldn't have had the ability to endure if God had taken this supernaturally and immediately away from me. I am acutely aware of my frailty, my humanity, my brokenness. And I like to believe that I have more empathy because of the challenges that I have faced through my life. But I've had to practice mindfulness. I've had to discipline myself to get enough sleep. I have to have regular exercise. And quite honestly, I have to connect with others. I think for many of us that battle for our mental health, at the core of our battle is a fear. If you're anything like me, that at a subconscious level, we are fearful that if we're ever fully known, that we wouldn't be fully loved. When the fact of the matter is, it is impossible to be fully loved without being fully known. In this practice of developing connection with others, where we can talk about the issues, not simply our victories, but be honest about our defeats. As many times, as humbling as that is, God uses it to build powerful, powerful things in our lives. I also think that one of the common misconceptions about the progressive nature of resiliency is that somehow if God was really on our team, it would just happen in an instant, just snap our fingers and it would happen. And the fact of the matter is, sanctification is a big church religious word that just means that God over time progressively shapes you into a better form of who you are at the very moment. Sanctification is just a big word for God changes you. God changes you for the better. He shapes you into into your destiny. And in a world that loves the microwave, God likes to use a crock pot to do those kind of things. And it takes commitment to the journey, not simply the result. I think that for me, honestly, I would say that if you were to say, what's the number one activity that helps you develop resiliency, it's helping others along the way. It's not waiting until I'm fixed. It's not making excuses to not do things because I was battling anxiety the night before. It's what we call at Goby, like the willingness to play hurt, to play scared, to get in there and give it our best when we're not at our best. And here's what we find out. What we find out in those moments is we have more strength than we thought we had, because Paul said it this way. He said, when I boast in my weaknesses, when I do what God has called me to do, in spite of he called it a thorn in the flesh, he said, Christ's power rests on me. And I think a lot of times when we refuse to embrace the resistance that comes in developing resilience, we miss God's best in our lives. I believe that to be true in my life, at least. If you were to come to one of our live events, a parenting seminar that we call Goby School, or a weekend event at a church, or a weeknight event at a community center at a college or university, you'll see me at the end standing there signing books. There's something about people want their books personally signed. In every book, I write the same thing. Every kid's book, The Adventures of Toby the Goby, I write, just keep swimming. And if you were to read my book, Not Yet, the book for adults, on what I've learned on this 30-year journey, it would say, just keep walking. Because resiliency is built over time as I break through these mental barriers that I have erected about how much strength I really have, how much ability I really have to embrace and endure the resistance in my life to become everything God has wanted me to become. That's my heart for you, and that's my heart for me in the days ahead, that we might develop resiliency together. Just keep swimming, my friends. You'll be glad you did.